I've just spent about 4 hours hands-on with the Nintendo Switch 2, the sequel to my favorite console of all time. I've been counting down to this moment for like a quarter of my life. So here's my take. I think that from every single angle you look at it, the Switch 2 is like the grown-up version of the Switch 1. It now looks a lot more sophisticated, much less like a toy designed for a playroom. It's more powerful, with new features and a new game library that are very clearly geared to more serious gamers. I mean, even Donkey Kong is now wearing pants, for goodness sake. The problem, though, is that what also appears to have grown up with it is the price. And I don't just mean the retail price of $449 compared to the $299 for the original Switch. There's actually just so many ways in which you feel like you're being overcharged here, or you're not getting the things that you feel like you should for what you're paying. So let's talk. First thing, how does the Switch 2 feel in your hands? Well, big was actually my very first thought. Compared to the original Switch's 6.2-inch display, the 7.9-incher on this bad boy does actually feel enormous. It's like 60% more total viewing area. It's a bigger screen than the one on the Steam Deck. It's bigger than the ones on pretty much every single handheld gaming device. And I think it's great. I think this is Nintendo realizing that no one was trying to put the original Switch in their pocket anyways. Might as well just make it the ideal size for playing on. And it's kind of a double benefit here. I can't tell you the number of times that I've tried to have 4 friends crouched around my tiny Switch 1 squinting just to keep track of their character in Mario Kart. It's still not going to be easy here, but at least multiplayer in tabletop mode feels viable. And now, you can actually charge the thing while doing it, thanks to having a top-mounted USB-C port as well as the bottom one. So there you go. Prayers sometimes do get answered. And then my second thought was, this also feels sturdier than Switch 1. Let's be very real, the original Switch was a rushed console. Nintendo had just released the Wii U, that thing completely flopped, and so they had to rapidly pivot and try to develop a completely redesigned console in just 4 years to stay relevant. The Switch 2 is not that. Nintendo has had 8 years to simply take something that was already pretty good and to refine it. And you can tell by how much of the cheapness and the jankiness from the original Switch they've managed to iron out here. Like the new Joy-Con 2s. I think it's fair to say that we've all been a little worried that because they're now magnetic, that there'd be some sort of obvious rattle. But honestly, they feel very much like just part of the console. And that's down to 2 things. It's A, that you've got 2 large magnets on each side of the body, which snap directly into the SL and SR buttons, because those are now made of metal. But then really the MVP is, this is such a weird thing to say, but this cutout, because this interlocks exactly with the protrusion on the controllers. And I guess the fit is precise enough that it feels like the only way that you could take them out again would be to hit the release button here and then pull directly out to the side. I was also originally nervous about this connector in the middle, but playing around with the mechanism, it actually feels like it would be very difficult to accidentally snap it. And then you got this new kickstand, which I gotta say, it looks skinny as hell and not very reassuring, but it does hold its position. And there's also these rubber feet under the console, which means the thing's never really a slip risk. So I'd give the Switch 2 9 out of 10 for design. Now, just like the general construction of the thing, the display on the original Switch had issues. Low brightness, like you could forget about using it in sunlight. Washed out colors because of the old school LCD tech. No oleophobic coating, which meant fingerprint city, and a 720p resolution, which even compared to screens then felt soft. And so I'm delighted to say that the Switch 2's display is a lot better. Thank goodness. Whew. Like, it's a big jump in brightness. That's the reason it can support HDR gaming. It also does go a long way towards offsetting the fingerprint problem, and it looks a lot clearer too. It's now 1080p, double the number of pixels compared to the Switch 1, and probably the single most expected but also eagerly anticipated upgrade. So very happy about all of that. And here's the point where I was planning to start a little rant, because this is an LCD display, the same tech you saw on the original Switch, the same tech that you see on your Mealy washing machine. And so when I came into this hands-on, I was fully expecting the new console to have the same washed-out colors that we spent the last 8 years barely tolerating on the original Switch. Well, it doesn't. The Switch 2's display looks freaking phenomenal, like miles better than the one on the Switch 1. Putting the two side by side makes that one very clearly look last generation. But the thing that really surprised me was when I put the OLED Nintendo Switch next to the Switch 2, because I actually think the color reproduction on this LCD display comes out on top. This was not on my bingo card, just like the fact that the Switch 2 also has a 120Hz variable refresh rate, which on the face of it sounds kind of pointless. On a handheld console with limited power and limited battery, who's playing games at 120Hz? But the thing is, it gives developers choice. Because the refresh rate is variable, it means that they can choose to make their games run at an ultra smooth 120 frames per second if they feel like that brings their vision to life, or if they were making a massive 3D world that they know the Switch 2 is only going to be able to play at 30 frames per second anyway, they could actually just lock the frame rate of the screen to 30 Hz to save battery compared to the old Switch screen, which would just run at 60 Hz regardless of what's happening on it. So to be honest, based on what I was expecting and based on what we came from, Switch 2's display can have a 10 from me. The controllers are a very safe upgrade, but a very important one. Kind of like the way the whole system looks and feels, the controllers are yet another area that I would say feels distinctly more gamer. More like a tool, less like a Happy Meal toy. The main problem that I had with the original Joy-Cons is, as someone with fairly large hands, trying to play any kind of serious competitive game on these tiny controllers felt a bit like if someone asked you to send a text on a Tic Tac. And so I'm pretty relieved that the Joy-Con 2s are quite a bit more manageable because of the size increase, but also these secondary shoulder buttons are a lot easier to get to now, since they're not as recessed as the ones on the Switch 1, and they have about 3 times the surface area. And it's a better experience when it's all connected together too. Not a massive fan of the face buttons, they've still got that clickiness to them which feels a little bit less like the soft, spacious home console buttons, but you can feel how the primary triggers go that little bit deeper. They've got nicer contouring around your fingers. The analog sticks are a little bigger. I'd still call them low profile, but they don't feel as nubby as they did before. Oh, on that note though, I do find it really weird that nothing has been said about Joy-Con drift. Like, Nintendo hasn't even indirectly hinted that they realized there was an issue with the old Joy-Cons and that they fixed it here. Joy-Con drift was not a joke. Like, I must have lost 6 to 8 of my controllers over the life cycle of the original Switch to this one issue. So it's a very major thing that they might have ironed out here, but they also might not have, and that would be very alarming. Anyways, we got to talk about the elephant in the room. These optical sensors embedded into the new Joy-Cons, which allow you to plant them on a flat surface, and assuming you have the new Joy-Con clips attached, then with no further action or menus that you need to navigate, you can just start using these Joy-Cons as if they were like computer mice, with, unlike computer mice, haptic feedback built in. I mean, what an absolutely insane feature that only Nintendo would try. It's just so smart, like taking advantage of the fact that the bottoms of these controllers are flat anyways, and using that to turn them into something that opens up an entirely new genre of games available to everyone who buys a Switch 2 with no extra accessories required that would be very difficult to play on any other console. WarioWare is going to be crazy on this one. But seriously, for games like Civilization 7, which by the way is already confirmed for Switch 2, this is going to be miles better than fiddling around with a joystick to drag your cursor around. And can you imagine how much easier things like Mario Maker 3 are going to be? So I was very quickly impressed by the feature, but then I was thinking, surely this is only going to work if you're sitting in your living room with a literal desk and a mousepad in front of you. But actually, it works anywhere. You can literally play on your lap, and I would say it still feels as responsive as an entry-level wireless PC mouse. So if we say the original Switch was a 4 out of 10 for controllers, I think we're up to a 7 here. And then, just like with the Switch 1, when you want to play Switch 2 on the big screen, you drop it into its dock and you carry on where you left off. But you'll notice a few things have changed with the dock too. First, it's now curved to match the curve of the console itself. Nice. I didn't actually get to put a Switch 2 in myself, but you can see on the inside a more guided structure, which should hopefully mean less fumbling around when you're trying to get the console in. But the thing also now has a fan inside, which, I mean, I suppose in itself is not an exciting feature. If anything, it might make it a little noisier. But it gives the necessary cooling to allow games that would run at, say, 1080p when in handheld mode to now run at up to 4K on your TV, which feels like as good a time as any to assess how good do Switch 2 games actually look and feel. So what you're seeing right now is the new Mario Kart World, which, to be honest, even Switch 2 aside, is a pretty big deal. I find it kind of insane how relevant Mario Kart has still managed to remain, even though we haven't seen a proper new game in the series for like 11 years. Not to even mention that the last one was technically top 5 best-selling video games of all time. And I would say, visually, it looks pretty good. The karts are definitely more detailed than any previous Mario Kart game. There's a bunch of little things like the water effects and the weather effects that do feel like a noticeable upgrade. The game's at a higher resolution and a very nice, silky smooth 60 frames per second. But I also wouldn't say that I was blown away. I did notice with Mario Kart, but also pretty much every single Switch 2 game I played, quite a lot of aliasing, which just means, the jaggedness that you see around the edges of things. Most surface textures, they still feel quite simple. And so while I would say, graphically speaking, most of the current Switch 2 games do feel a little out of the reach of what the original Switch was capable of, you also won't be confusing these games with PlayStation 5 games, for example. Now, two things in the Switch's favor. One, that you could argue playing on a TV isn't utilizing its strong suit. It's like, of course the PS5 is going to look better because it is a home console and it can only be a home console. Whereas I would argue the Switch is at its best when you're actually playing handheld. And the second is that it feels like most of the extra power that we now have because of this new Switch has actually been put towards world design. It's the ability to have 24 races instead of 12, the ability to seamlessly transition from map to map with no loading screens, and the ability to have much bigger maps where you can just yeet yourself off the beaten track and go wherever your heart pleases. And to be honest, I say this having watched the Nintendo Direct alongside a group of friends who were just squealing with glee in the group chat watching these announcements. I think that is what people are looking for in a next-gen Nintendo game, not just like a shinier Mario Kart 8. It's another one of those situations where, just like with the console, they've had so much time to cook with this game that, of course, the meal is going to be hot. And honestly, I think the best news that came out of this is that this game is a Switch 2 exclusive. Like, there is no doubt that Nintendo would have made more money from it if they'd also released it on the 150 million or so Switch 1s out there. But making it an exclusive is really good for the Switch 2's health. It's going to make a lot of people buy this console at launch, and that starts to make it a very attractive platform to develop for, leading to more games getting made for it and the cycle continuing. As for the rest of the game lineup, I think it would be hard to argue that there isn't a lot going on. New Mario game, new Kirby game, new Donkey Kong game. Each one is huge in its own right. There's a completely Switch 2 exclusive game from FromSoft, developers of Elden Ring, which was wildly unexpected. There was an absolute bucket load of third-party games that are also on other consoles, but what makes it particularly special to have them here is that, well, having them on Switch 2 is basically the only way you would ever be able to play these games on a plane, but also that they are proof that the very same games that are running on PlayStation 5 are also able to be handled by Switch 2 in a way that doesn't actually completely suck visually. It's good news for long-term platform support. Cyberpunk is the only game that I did feel looked a little soft and muddy. But then again, you could argue that just the fact that the game is even running on a Nintendo handheld is a feat in itself. Plus, there's the fact that the Switch 2 can completely play Switch 1 games. Pretty much all of them right out the box, which is something that not every console maker does and should be credited. And Nintendo Switch 2 Edition games, which are basically Switch 1 games for which the developer has used the extra features and power of Switch 2 to just improve the experience. So you see what I'm saying, right? There's a lot of gaming to be done on this console just with what's been announced at this point. But this is also where the problems start to creep in. So while I do think that the new exclusive Switch 2 games are big name games, apart from Mario Kart, I wouldn't say any of them really did anything for me. Like, I didn't see anything that felt particularly unique or made me want to rush out and buy this console to play them. But then also, to play any of these Nintendo Switch 2 Edition games, you have to pay for an upgrade pack, which is not really the norm. Like, plenty of PlayStation 4 games were enhanced for PS5 free of charge. And yes, some of these Switch 2 Edition games are also adding content as part of this upgrade pack, but then it's also looking like some aren't. And I think, to be honest, the default for most third-party developers going forward will be to not bother integrating new stuff, but just literally to take their old game, unlock the game's frame rate, make it run at a slightly higher resolution, but then to charge an extra chunk for it. And really, this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to pricing. Like, the games, for example, Donkey Kong is being priced at $70, Mario Kart is being priced at $80, and it's looking like the physical versions of these games might cost even more than that. I guess because of the faster storage that these new Switch 2 cartridges need to have inside of them, but these are new industry highs. And there's more. This new game chat feature, activated via the mysterious new C button, apart from the fact that the microphone is on the console and not the controller, giving me significant doubts about its ability to pick up your voice clearly when it's sitting right next to your TV, it actually does, in concept, look like a really cool feature. I think it's amazing that you can see what every single one of your friends is doing while still playing your game. I think the integration with the Nintendo Switch camera is really thoughtful. But why is voice chat, a feature so fundamental to basic console use, locked behind an online subscription paywall? Why is this tutorial game, Welcome Tour, which is literally Nintendo's one-to-one equivalent of PlayStation's free baked-in Astrobot, a paid experience? If we were giving benefit of the doubt, it's plausible that Nintendo is doing all of this just because the console itself cost them a lot more to make than they were expecting, and they need to recoup those costs somehow. If we're not, then it could just be that Nintendo has seen the success of the Switch 1, knows the Switch 2 is going to sell, and so wants to make as much out of that launch as possible. Okay, 2 final things before we bring this all together. 1, storage used to be a big weak point on the original Switch. You'd only get 32 gigabytes internally, so given that the average game was like 10, 3 games and a demo, and you had to fork out for an SD card. You now get 256 gigabytes, which I'm guessing should be enough for at least 6 big Switch 2 games. And the best thing, which I think has flown completely under the radar, is game share. The ability to play multiplayer with people, even if they don't own their own copies of the game that you want to play. It's actually almost identical to a feature that we used to have on the Nintendo DS, like way back in the day. But you know, that was one of the best things about that console. I wonder if your Switchless friends can only play as Shy Guy in Mario Kart again. So where do I sit? Well, I do still think there are a bunch of important unanswered questions about this console. Like, are all Switch 2 games suddenly going to be $20 more expensive? How many of those games are going to support the new features of the console? And the one I'm paying particular attention to is game share. Because, I mean, if games are going to get more expensive, then one way you could potentially justify it is, oh fine, my friends don't need to also buy it too. Probably the biggest one though is Nintendo actually investing more in better online servers? Because I've actually a few times just straight up rage quit trying to play Smash Online last gen because it was just lag city. But based on everything that I can see, I think Nintendo is in a strong position. The entire console market runs on momentum, and Nintendo has a lot of it right now. They've already shown a lot of first-party support for the console, and I think third-party support is going to be even stronger here than it was on the original Switch. The primary catch is that it's more expensive than I think most people expected, both to buy, but also to keep. And so I could see a lot of people not springing to purchase this right away, waiting until there are games that they absolutely have to play. But then there will also be plenty of people who will buy this console at launch and who will be able to immediately feel why the thing is worth more. And since it also completely encompasses the functionality of the original Switch 1, can hopefully recoup at least $100 of the cost by selling theirs. So that's pretty much the Switch 2. Hopefully you can now switch to the next video on our channel. I'll catch you there.